Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at Agent Venom, Scream, and Toxin. There's a lot to cover, but I decided to put them all in the same video just to give you kind of a comparison of how the characters stack up to one another in PvE and PvP so that you can better decide which ones to prioritize first. I'm going to try to make the video as concise as I can without it dragging on too long. The first character of the three that I'm looking at is Agent Venom. And this character is the support of the group and is more oriented towards PvP, I would say, than PvE. Keep in mind that my build for all three characters is with no damage proc unless I state otherwise. You can kind of get an idea that this character isn't really oriented towards PvE, since on stage 99 of Thanos, I was able to finish the fight with only about 30 seconds left. The Awakening definitely is a huge help for him, since it improved my clear time by at least a minute and a half. If you want the character to excel in PvE, I would highly recommend using a CTP of Rage over the other options. The main reasons for that is one, that he does have guaranteed crit rate in his kit, and the other is that you have to spam a lot of his skills, and some of them do have a delayed cancel. So if you use something like a single skill damage proc, you likely won't get to proc on the skill that you want. He does have some good abilities for PvE, such as chain hit damage, damage accumulation, a damage buff on his fourth skill, and even increased damage versus villains. If you're also lucky to have gotten his artifact, which I did, and I have it equipped as you can see with the orange icon, you'll also get the added benefit of a little bit more damage when the opponent is over a certain amount of health, which I believe is somewhere around 20 to 25% based on the artifact level. However, even with all those attributes, I was only able to clear Null with about close to 2 minutes left, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's also really not that great either. Just for quick reference, if you watched my Gore video, you would know that Gore completes the same stage in about the same amount of time. However, he is close to 4 times as expensive to build up as Agent Venom, which is another reason why he desperately needs to get buffed. As expected, the character doesn't really perform that well in Alliance Battle Extreme either, despite the fact that he does also have paralysis and burn in his kit. I was only able to score around 6.7 million and wasn't even able to crack the 7 million mark, which for most characters that can be viable for this mode, I should be able to reach at least close to 8 million or 8 million without a damage proc, which I clearly wasn't able to do. The rotation for Agent Venom is sort of tricky because there is a lot of spamming and kind of delaying your skills, but in general you basically want to use the third skill every time it's up, and you can cancel it quickly to go into your other skills, but you basically want to do that to get those turret spawns up to do damage. From there you want to go into your fifth skill to start the damage accumulation, and you want to cancel that skill, or rather delay cancel it, after you land on the ground. After that, you can go into the second skill, but make sure that when the third skill is off cooldown, you quickly cancel that. The last thing that you want to do in the rotation is the fourth skill, where you finish off with that because it does give you the damage increase, which buffs up the skills in the next time that you do the rotation. So to sum up, the rotation is something like 3 cancel 5, delay cancel 2, 3 cancel 4. Once you have the Awakening skill available, you basically want to do 3 cancel 6, cancel, and then the rest of the rotation like before, since you can insta-cancel the Awakening skill. One quick tip about this rotation is to not necessarily spam the fifth skill immediately when it's off cooldown, because the damage accumulation buff will go on longer than the skill cooldown does. So basically, if you spam the fifth skill frequently, you won't get the most out of the buff from the damage accumulation because you're constantly resetting it and try to fill it up. That's why I incorporated the second skill into the rotation before activating the fifth skill, which should be off cooldown at that same time. You can again see that Agent Venom isn't really oriented for PvE, since I wasn't able to clear the first phase of Giant Boss Raid Dormammu, even on the combat day, within that 2-minute window, which is usually the indicator that he can clear that fight. However, while I was testing, I also noticed that the fourth skill wasn't really connecting and doing all the hits from the skill, so I think that the fourth skill is bugged and the character might actually be a little bit better for PvE than my testing showed. Scream, on the other hand, is one of these symbiotes that is definitely oriented more towards PvE than PvP. For a free-to-play character, she is actually quite decent, since I was able to clear a stage 99 of Thanos with no damage proc, with close to 2 minutes remaining, which compared to Agent Venom is a whole minute and 30 seconds faster. With the Awakening, my clear time improved by about 40 seconds, but because of the limitations from the animations and phase changes, it probably would have been closer to a minute and 30 seconds faster. Scream got a ton of PvE qualities with her latest uniform, including increased physical damage, chain hit damage, critical damage, guaranteed crit rate, a damage buff on her 4th skill I believe, damage accumulation on her 3rd skill, and also if you were able to get her artifact, her crit damage also increases past the cap by a certain amount. I don't have that equipped though. Although you can run a CTP of Rage for her specifically for PvE, since she does have that guaranteed crit rate, I find that her skills are pretty proc friendly, but there is one caveat that her skills do tend to activate the proc pretty quickly. So if you do play her with a single skill damage proc, either CTP of Destruction, probably Mighty One, or CTP of Energy, then you do have to cancel the skills pretty quickly and go through the rotation pretty fast. You can see that this character is more oriented towards PvE than Agent Venom, since I was able to complete the same stage about 40 seconds faster with close to 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, which for my account is kind of the baseline for the character being above average for PvE, specifically if they can complete stage 9 of Null with no leadership or supports in a little bit over 2 minutes. Because Scream did so well, I decided to put a Mighty Destruction on her, and I was able to go 20 stages higher and complete it a little bit faster than before, specifically because I incorporated a leadership and support this time around. I tried to push her to the highest stage that I had available for Null, which was stage 59, and I believe that that was for the female hero tag restriction. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to clear that. I finished with about 7 health bars left. However, if I improved her build a little bit more, or maybe bumped it down to stage 55, I'm pretty sure that I would have been able to complete that stage. Which again, I have to say is pretty respectable for a free-to-play character. She's sort of like a weaker version of Miss Marvel or Kamala Khan's latest uniform. Don't get that confused with being on her level, I'm just using that as kind of a rough comparison. She is weaker than that character. The character does have paralysis and silence in their kit. She is missing burn, so if you do want to use her on the combat hero day restriction for ABX, you can use her there. I was able to score 8 million without a damage proc. With the Mighty Destruction, I was able to bump that up to 8.8 million, meaning that if you ran something like a Rage, you could probably score somewhere around 9.5 million or 10 million with a maxed out build, probably even more than that if you have a really high-end build. The skill rotation for Scream is pretty straightforward if you have a single skill damage proc. You basically do 3, cancel 5, cancel 4. You do the 3rd first to get the damage accumulation, the 5th after to get another damage layer, and the 4th skill to get your single skill damage buff as well as additional buffs from that, and proc on the skill. When you have your Awakening skill, you can incorporate it right after the 3rd skill, and similar to Agent Venom, it can also be instant cancelled. However, I generally use the 6th skill cancelled right away before the rotation because the 3rd skill might proc your CTP early, and then you won't be able to proc on the 4th skill like you want. Because I was able to do the first phase in about 2 minutes, that is another reason why I put a proc on her to see if she could complete the entire fight with the Mighty CTP Destruction. And as you can see from this clip, I was actually able to complete it with almost close to 3 minutes left. Toxin is the last character that I'm looking at, and he is very similar to Agent Venom in that he has a more PvP oriented build. In terms of his PvE performance, he seems to be a bit better than Agent Venom and a good bit worse than Scream, so he basically falls in the middle of these two. You can see that from the clears on Thanos stage 99. He finished 30 seconds faster than Agent Venom, but about a minute slower than Scream. With the Awakening, he gets about a minute improvement, which is very similar to the amount that Agent Venom and Scream both got. Toxin doesn't seem to have nearly as good PvE qualities as the other two characters have, but yet he still does seem to perform better than Agent Venom in PvE content. He basically just has a damage accumulation on his 3rd skill and a damage buff on his 4th skill. I did mention previously that Agent Venom's 4th skill might be bugged, so he could potentially be better than Toxin. However, you also have to keep in mind that Agent Venom has a uniform, whereas this is Toxin's performance without a uniform. So he has room to go basically higher than Agent Venom's performance. So if you wanted to build the character for PvE, again, I think a CTP of Rage might be the most ideal option, mostly because if you try to use something like an Energy or Destruction, you kind of have to delay cancel his 3rd and 4th skill, which might cause the proc to occur early and not trigger on the skill that you want. Also keep in mind that this is yet another character that can finish stage 9 of Null with a little bit over 2 minutes left, meaning that Toxin is better than Gore, a character that is almost 4 times as expensive for this mode. Not to mention the fact that Scream was way better than Gore or these other characters, and that is a free-to-play option. On the ABX side, he does have Silence and Paralysis and no burn, but as expected, his performance falls in between Agent Venom and Scream, being able to score 7 million without a damage proc, whereas Agent Venom scored 6.7 million and Scream scored 8 million. Surprisingly enough, I was able to complete the first phase of Dormammu in about 2 minutes, which means that with a damage proc, just like Scream, this character should be able to clear on the combat day. The rotation that I used for the character is to start with 3, delay cancel that after it shows the tentacles kind of going into the ground. Then you go into the 4th skill, wait about a half second for the animation to start up, and then you go into the 5th skill. Similar to Agent Venom, when you have the awakening, you do 3 to get the accumulation started, then delay cancel into the 6th skill, which you can cancel right away into the rest of the rotation. Although Agent Venom and Toxin are worse in PvE than Scream, they are significantly better in PvP. Agent Venom gets a ton of good PvP attributes, including reduced chain hit damage, continuous healing, as well as burst healing on his passive, up to 50% increased damage versus villains, as well as 5 seconds of penetration and iframe ignore on his 4th skill. His AI rotation is also pretty great. He usually opens with the 4th skill, often because the opponent iframes, which gives him that penetration, and because the skill is on such a long animation, oftentimes he'll just keep repeating it, which also gives him 5 seconds of invincible. However, because he isn't in iframe during that skill's full duration, sometimes he'll get interrupted, which will allow him to go into his 5th skill, which is pretty great because it provides him even more damage from the damage accumulation, and because the skill also does a good amount of damage itself. The main downside with the 4th skill is that he isn't in full iframe for it, so if you're fighting an opponent that has a lot of AoE, or if the opponent has reflect or passive reflect, then Agent Venom will struggle to a degree because he'll take a lot of damage during that long animation for the skill. If you want to build the character for survival, which is what I would recommend first, I would probably say that a CTP of Regen is his most ideal option because of his high base health, his continuous healing, his burst healing, and because he also has crit damage passively in his kit. CTP of Regen is what I'm using compared to something like a Steel Authority because he already gets invincible from his 4th skill, he already has crit damage in his kit, and because the Steel effect doesn't really stack up much considering that he doesn't really have it unless you get his artifact. And even then, it's only as high as 30% with a max level 1. If you want a more offensive build, a CTP of Greed will likely be the most ideal there, considering that the alternative, a CTP of Destruction, won't benefit him as much since he does have crit damage and penetration already in his kit. Looking at Scream, she doesn't really have many things in her kit that help her in PvP, besides the fact that she can reduce recovery rate across her skills. I tested her with an invincible custom gear, however her performance was pretty much identical with the damage proc, since the invincible didn't really add much to her survival. One other good thing about her is that she usually goes into her 3rd and 4th skill fairly quickly, and the lingering and buff that she gets from the 4th skill does give her some good burst potential. That said, I would still recommend an offensive build. I went with a CTP of Destruction just to get that extra penetration and the burst damage to be able to take out some higher level metas. Even if she does end up dying, the lingering effects from these skills could potentially take out the opponents too. I would say that Toxin is probably the best of the three in PvP, since with a mighty Steel Authority, I was able to take out Thanos and even one life of Warlock. Similar to Agent Venom, Toxin has a lot of good PvP abilities. He has that passive or continuous healing, but he also has up to 40% damage mitigation and 30% more penetration on his iframe ignore skill, going up to 60% as opposed to the 33% from Agent Venom. On top of that, he also has a 30% active heal on his third skill. Again, similar to Agent Venom, his ARI rotation is pretty solid, usually opening with the fourth skill when the opponent iframes and giving him that penetration as well as the damage buff. He then often follows up with the fifth skill, which does a good amount of damage, and if that gets interrupted or if he just ends up finishing that skill, he'll oftentimes either go back into the fourth skill or go into the third skill, which gives him that healing and the additional damage to all of his skills from the damage accumulation. You might be wondering how the character started performing so much better in these other clips compared to the first one, and why I recommended or am using a CTP of Authority with the Steel effect as opposed to something like a regen, because he also does have very high base health and passive healing like Agent Venom. The reason for the Steel Authority and the better performance is because I included Agent Venom as a support on the team. He not only provides reduced chain hit damage, but the artifact that I have equipped also increases damage mitigation. That means that with the Steel effect and those effects, I can get the reduced damage so high that he can basically survive things like Hulk's burst damage, as well as even Warlock's burst damage from his second skill, even though he does have a type advantage versus him. If you don't have Agent Venom or his artifact, then a CTP of Regen will likely work pretty well for Toxin, and again, if you do want to use him offensively, a CTP of Greed will likely be your best option there, since he already does have penetration in his kit, so you'd only pretty much get the crit damage from the destruction. I managed to get some testing for Alliance Conquest, and you can see from this first clip that Scream seems to be okay for a standalone character, since she can stay in iframe and do a lot of damage. The more interesting tests were with Toxin and Agent Venom. They seem to be a very solid unit together, and I would highly recommend using them on the same team, considering the buffs that Agent Venom provides to Toxin, and how much better Toxin gets with those added mitigations and survival to his kit. I was able to take down a Thanos with 2 supports, so the next thing that I wanted to see is if the characters were able to take down the Eternals, specifically if they could handle Cersei's Awakening skill, which, as you could see, they could. The last thing I checked was to see if the characters could handle opponents that had a type advantage in Reflect versus them, and as you could see, I won that as well. Basically, to sum up all 3 characters, Agent Venom is a great support and also a solid PvP unit, Toxin is a very good PvP unit, and Scream is primarily great for PvE. If you want to know which characters to get first, for PvP, I'd probably go with Toxin, for PvE, Scream, and then if you want something in between, you can't go with Agent Venom. However, you also have to keep in mind that he is a really good support, so if you are planning on also picking up the Venom uniform, which I'll cover in the following video, then I would highly recommend him over the other 2 first. Hopefully the video didn't get too long, but I felt like it was probably better to include all 3 in the same video so you can see how they kind of compare and contrast with one another, and players can decide which ones to go for or in what order to get them. In the next video, I'll cover Venom's T4, and after that, I'll probably look at Widow's T4. Don't forget, if you're not happy with Gore in his current state, then I would highly advise making your voice heard on social media and the forums so that the devs hopefully listen and rectify that issue. Anyways, I put a lot of effort in this particular video, so if you did enjoy it and found it useful, please consider sharing it and also consider liking and subscribing to this video. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.